Good morning, everyone. I have to say that as David sort of indicated, my speech has, it's as well I didn't take the time to spend too much time writing my speech last week, because with the events and the conversations that have, or the whispers, if you like, and the rumours that have taken place over the last number of days, it would certainly be remiss of me to not use this forum to perhaps give you a developer's view of what I think about the UK government and certainly what it's supposedly contemplating. But before I do that, I want to sort of set the scene. I'm not sure how many of you are actually familiar with Lightsource, but I think it would probably be worthwhile maybe giving you a little bit of background, not only because of the fact that it adds position, but also because of the fact that it's something that I and my team are amazingly proud of. Therefore, I might as well fly the flag, given I've got the opportunity. So this is our sort of corporate profile. I'm going to keep this short, sweet, and to the point, because I've got some other opinions, as I said. Lightsource, as David says, is we believe, well, it is the largest developer, owner, operator of industrial scale PV in the UK. We have, I'm just going to go straight to the numbers. Last year I stood on this stage exactly sort of a year ago. It wasn't actually this stage, but it was somewhere else. It was in Cornwall, and sort of said that we were at 300 megawatts, and everyone sniggered whenever I said that we were going to get to 600 megawatts. But I'm very proud that we put our money where our mouth is, and we're now in a position to say that we have 600 megawatts operational in the UK. As David says, there were some interesting challenges over the last month. I think we actually connected 227 megawatts in the month of March, and we did 16 of those 26 sites connected in the last weekend. And what he was saying about in terms of we found some interesting ways to make sure that we got our stuff connected is we basically dealt with human nature head on, and we figured that the majority of the DNO individuals would be male, and boys like their toys. And one of the biggest toys that boys like are helicopters, and therefore we took the approach of whenever we were being connected in the afternoon and somebody else was being connected in the morning, we figured that if that site ran on, maybe the guy who was going to switch on our site wouldn't want to go to our site if he was able to drive home and have his dinner with his wife. But we figured if we stuck a helicopter in the next field waiting for him to fly him to plug our site in, then believe me, his dinner was going to get cold. And indeed, his dinner did get cold. They all got on the helicopters and everything got connected. So a big well done to everyone. And I'm sure you all have many stories, but certainly from our perspective, that's definitely one that amused me. They're not as expensive as you think either, I have to say. In terms of where we are as a company, is that it? Yeah. We currently have 106 large-scale installations for the sort of 600 megawatts. We also have 97 schools, 31 farm installations, and £100 million worth of assets in France. And it's not just because it's the nearest country. We wanted to basically do something at a distance, and certainly that's a very well-performing portfolio. But I think for us, the main focus definitely has been and remains large-scale. As you know, or many of you will know, we also made the decision to buy Renewable Resources, which is was the UK's largest roof in our EPC contractor. We bought that at the back end of last year, and certainly from our perspective, that gives a little bit of a clue as to where we see the growth coming. However, as I'll comment later, the growth doesn't necessarily mean that we have the ability as an industry to throw out the ground mount and simply replace it overnight with roof installations. That would be somewhat naive, to say the least. Okay, so moving on, that's enough about Lightsource. Let's talk about industry proper. I did intend to come here being massively positive. If you'd asked me to write my speech, which I didn't, because I'm like that, a week ago, I have to say it was filled with the positivity that Jonathan talks about, who, by the way, is my new best friend after his last speech. I think that was fantastic. But I was lucky enough to go to the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Conference in New York. And I have to say, I'm not a great one for those conferences. I think that they are too bloody expensive to start off with, but that aside, I think that they're filled with individuals who are more about flying the flag of their own company. I'm one to talk, rather than necessarily driving an industry forward. But I have to say, I completely and utterly reverse that view. It was probably one of the, from a business perspective, because I have to say that my wife will kill me, but it's one of the most productive 3 days from a business perspective I think I've had. In terms of reigniting you know, your interest and your belief in us as an industry in terms of, you know, basically turning me on to the huge opportunities, not only in the UK but across the entire world. I mean, it was incredible. You know, we were talking about, or we were talked to by the CEO of the likes of Formula E. You know, Formula E, like Formula One, is a way of making sure that, you know, by commercializing something, huge strides forward in technology are driven that obviously benefits all of us positively. Formula E was fascinating. Smart grids, storage, not only batteries but other forms of storage. All of these things that will absolutely metamorphose our industry are being talked about. But, you know, I went to that conference and I got talked to by the CEOs, not by some individual who happened to be wheeled in front of me because I happened to be in the area. Some other interesting points I took from it. Somebody, and I think there's a book, but I'm not good on books, someone described it as what we were doing as the third industrial revolution. And I think that doesn't overplay the point. You know, we basically are at the vanguard of you know, what is an absolute sea change in the way that we generate our electricity. Another interesting point I took from it was that we've taken hundreds of, or it has taken, I'm not involved, hundreds of millions of years to create the Earth as we have it today, and yet in 300 short years, we potentially are going to kill the entire planet. And I think that's an amazingly, I think it's too easy sometimes to forget about what we do, basically be driven by the financials. But ultimately, one of the big things that we have on our side is the fact that solar is good. We are doing something that is correct. And therefore, it's something that should be something that we, if you like, adds impetus to what we do. And then I came back to the UK. And unfortunately, this is where the tone of the speech very much changes. It's a really interesting scenario, and this is a truly British trait, I think, that I arrived in the UK and I found out that we had installed large scale in the UK 1,085 megawatts in the first quarter. And immediately, and I don't know how many of you agree with this, I had two overriding, completely polar opposite responses in my head. The first one was, wow. The first one was, oh my God, this industry, the individuals in this room, are amazing. You know, I stood here last year and the year before calling us a cottage industry. I wasn't being polite. This is not a cottage industry anymore. 1.1 gigawatts in a quarter. Guys, I take my hat off to you. That is an absolutely amazing result from a standing start, and something that we should be amazingly proud of, not something that we should be embarrassed about, which brings me to the other, my other emotion. Shit. The government's going to see this. What's the government going to do? We are a nation that rather than embraces and rewards massive deployment, we're one that throws stones at it. Rather than reward it financially, it penalizes. And it's completely counterintuitive. And it was made so obvious to me because of the fact that I'd spent so much time in New York. And New York, by the way, was not filled with Americans. New York was, but the conference wasn't. In fact, New York probably wasn't, but anyway. It was filled with people from all over the world. And the positivity of those people from all over the world is amazingly positive, but then it absolutely acts, the juxtaposition between that and coming back to the UK is felt even more acutely by me. Let's basically talk about why. Why is it that the government are deciding to take a cut? Is it sensible? And the reason why I say this is this cut, I think we should be much more fearful of than any other one. The cut from 30 pence to 8.5 pence. Guys, 30p was too much. For large scale, it was too much. That was correct that they cut that. We had to be brought into line with other technologies. So, and all of the other cuts were for real reasons. This cut scares me, or the potential of this cut scares me, because there is no reason for it. Let's think about what it could be. Let me just say the backdrop. This is the most popular technology. It's probably the least unpopular, rather than the most popular, but it's sort of the same thing. It has the least local impact. It does. You know, we're not digging up trees, whatever it is. It is the quickest to deploy. You know, from soup to nuts, as the Americans would say. I've obviously been in New York too long. It's 9 months from hello, how are you, Mr. Farmer, to I'm actually producing electricity. 9 months. We'll come back to Hinkley Point in a minute. Double it. And then there's the price dropping quickest. You know, I have an amazing graph that I won't bore you with because there were thousands of graphs at that, but you know, if you look at the reduction in price in solar technology and all its related elements compared to coal or indeed other technologies, this is the one that's price is dropping quickest. Never mind all of its advantages in terms of its ease of deployment remotely and its decentralized blah blah. No, I'm just talking about pure cost on a pound for pound basis. This is a government that supposedly claims to be agnostic to technology. Interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. Another lovely stat, by the way, that I love, because you know, one of the things it could be is land. Is it because of the land? Is it because of the fact that we're ruining our green and pleasant land? Is that why they don't like solar? There are 20 times more, there is 20 times more land used for golf courses in the UK than there is for solar. Let me see, will I eat or cut my handicap? I don't think we're at that stage yet, so why the hell are they picking on it? It's certainly not because of land. Is it because of need? Interesting. The gap in the UK, the projected gap currently between electricity generation and peak generation and peak need is now at 2%. What does that mean? There's a 2% need. If basically generation drops by 2% or more, we're in a blackout scenario. Now, whenever this government came to power, the gap was, I believe, 13%. So we're in a situation where we've turned off 3 times more generative capacity than we've put on since 2011. So it's not need, it's not land, and it's not need. So what could it be? UKIP, I hear you say. Let's talk about Hinkley Point. This is price. Hinkley Point will cost pretty much double, UK taxpayer, double what we're currently getting subsidised for solar. Okay. It will also take 20 years, 10 years to get planning and 10 years to get up to full tilt. Now, remember the 1 gigawatt in a quarter. If we can continue to do 1 gigawatt a quarter and not even grow anymore, in the next 20 years we'll build a bloody Hinkley Point. And you think the retired civil servants and the retired teachers that are basically waving banners saying don't ruin our country with solar, do you think they're going to be happy parked beside a nuclear power station? I'm not really sure that they are. So my point is not to get at Hinkley Point, not to get at nuclear, because I think nuclear is an important part of the energy mix. But please do not cut our subsidy and reduce down our ability to deploy in favour of nuclear, when surely you were the government that said, first of all, you were the greenest, and second of all, I make the point again, that you were agnostic to technology. Because that's clearly not the point if you're paying double the amount for a technology that is here 20 years from now rather than here today. I want to make another point that every single individual in this room, whether you realise it or not, and us particularly, because we've 300 staff, so I would imagine we're probably at the larger end of the employers here, but every single one of you is in this room and every single one of you has the infrastructure that you have in the UK today because you were promised scalability and you were promised, basically security for the future. We didn't build a 300-man business because of 1 year's worth of profits. We built a 300-man business because someone in the government, in documents and indeed in the House, and it's well documented, said to us that between now and 2017 there would be ROCs, and from 2017 beyond there would be CFDs. And this is the rate that it would be at. And we built our business with those numbers in mind. And I'm sorry, if you all roll over, because this one is different, I say again, this one is not for economic reasons, this is for political reasons. And if you roll over and you take that, then I think you're going to have to find a new country to go to, because I'm sorry, you're not going to have a future in the UK. We cannot roll over and allow this to happen. It's absolute. There is no reason for it other than the threat of UKIP winning some seats perhaps, or the threat of 6 large companies with deeper pockets than us basically supporting the government to make sure that they don't do anything that affects those companies' balance sheets. Another point that I was made to me in Bloomberg is that the big six, or the world oil companies rather than the big six in the UK specifically, have been told that 80% of the fossil fuels that they have in reserve need to stay in the ground if we're actually going to deliver what we need to save our planet. So, you know, all of these large companies are hugely negative to what we're doing, because ultimately, not because of planet saving reasons, but because of their bottom line, which is just wholly inappropriate at every level. So, the other point I think that the government is choosing to hide behind is this, oh, well, we're going to cut, we're going to sort of abuse large-scale solar, but we're going to focus on large-scale roof, and we're going to focus on domestic. Guys, they need to land their spaceship. Honestly, it is the assumption that you can go from 1 gigawatt and a quarter of large-scale to the same in roof is absolutely fundamental. I mean, they need their bumps felt. It's absolutely not going to happen. And we're a company that owns renewable resources. Now, Lightsource commercial rooftop, another plug. You know, so from our perspective, I'm not saying that because of the fact that I want to throw stones at other parts of the industry that we're not in. We are in it. But we still identify the fact that it is absolutely insane to assume that you can start from a standing start and basically get to that level. The other thing is that this is an intelligent market. The reason why roof large scale in the UK hasn't taken off is not because we've all been focusing on ground mount. It's because there are barriers to large scale installation. I'm sorry, not every roof is appropriate. This is a 25-year to 30-year construction. If the roof is only going to last 10 more years, not a great investment, boys. If structurally it can't take the weight, not a great investment. If it's in Scotland and points in the wrong direction, not a good investment. The fact that the UK government says we've got 22 gigawatts of capacity on our roofs is fine, but it doesn't mean we've actually got 22 gigawatts of roofs that suit. The fact that they're there is one thing, the fact that they suit is a wholly different assumption. So from our perspective, and I say that with, you know, from owning a business that wants to grow hugely this roof space, I'm sorry, it's not one or the other. It has to be all of the above, and domestic the same. Let me make another probably controversial point, because I know a lot of individuals in this room are in the residential space, which I have to say I'm a great advocate of. But you've got to be realistic about things. It can't be, and again, you know, domestic, is it a vote winner, what it is? You know, from our perspective, and I talked about this at the planning day yesterday, I could choose, or we could choose, to take, let's say, a village of 2,000 people. 2,000 people, 4 kilowatts each, two options. Stick 4 kilowatts in every one of their roofs, or find us a bit of land outside the town, and we'll install 4 kilowatts times 2,000, 8 megawatts, and we will basically, okay, we'll have to pay DUOS and TUOS charges, but we'll use the existing grid to supply that town or village with the electricity. So who loses there? Well, the person buying the electricity doesn't lose because they get it discounted. We don't lose because we get to obviously fund an 8 megawatt system. And UK PLC doesn't lose because it's paying 6p rather than 15p because of the fact that it's a large scale. And it's that sort of thinking that is fundamentally flawed. The fact that the government is constantly pushing to a more expensive, even with solar, it's pushing for a more expensive way of deploying it. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with domestic. What I'm saying is domestic, large scale and ground mount are all needed. But ultimately, what we can't do is have the government get away with throwing stones at one particular market because of the fact that maybe it doesn't make as many votes as some of the other ones. So I suppose what I would say is, on behalf of the Russian gas industry, thank you very much, UK PLC. On behalf of the Middle East oil industry, thank you very much, UK PLC. But on behalf of all of the solar investors and the solar developers in this room, I have to say, we basically can't roll over for this. We have to galvanize as an organization, as an entity, as we have before, but this time we've got to push back and make sure that we don't roll over and let things be done onto us. The potential for this market worldwide, and therefore UK as a subset of the world, is absolutely enormous. And we can't let short-sighted, vote-orientated decisions blinker that view. I'm sorry for maybe getting on the trumpet stand, but that's the advantage of being the sponsor. I sincerely hope that you have a wonderful couple of days. I'm sorry for ranting a bit. I will take a few questions, but before that, thank you very much indeed.
Jonathan Horsfield from Warwickshire County Council, hopefully getting into this into the market more. We know about climate change as the sort of one of the initial drivers, but what do you, and perhaps Jonathan, if he's still there, what do you feel about global and UK energy security, the affordability, the geological issues, the geopolitical issues as a driver for the industry?
The interesting thing I think about security is, let's not forget, we're not only an island from a physical perspective, we're also an energy island. We're not like Europe, where if German prices are too high, we can plug into France or Spain or whatever. We don't have that ability or that luxury. We're in a situation where as a country, and I'm including the Northern Irish lot as well, we've got to seek wherever we can as much homegrown electricity generation as possible. And last time I checked, there's not too much of that oil stuff up off Scotland. There was, but there's not too much left. Gas, fracking, maybe not too sure, but certainly other geographies are better than here. So, you know, solar, in an interesting way, isn't trying to compete with those other things. What it's saying is that we have got the ability, because of the huge reductions in pricing brought about by the Chinese, thank you very much indeed, despite Europe's attempt to basically bolster up that price. But thanks to them, we're in a situation where we can actually justify financially, on a par with other technologies, that solar works in the UK. And that is true homegrown generation. We are not relying on somebody else. We're not relying on, as I said, Russian gas. We're not relying on the Middle East for fossil fuels or oil. So from our perspective, I think that while it's not all of the solution, it's definitely part of the solution. Wind, solar, biomass, etc., wave, all those other technologies as an island are massively beneficial, and they're things that we should be sticking reins on rather than throwing stones at, from my perspective. 48% of the electricity that is used in Scotland is generated in Scotland. That's an amazing figure. Maybe there's not an awful lot of electricity used in Scotland, but the principle is important. So I think, you know, energy security, Scotland has absolutely led the way in terms of wave and tidal, etc., and also wind. But ultimately, it can be done. We have got natural resources that we need to stick reins on. And it's only because of this constant attempting to maintain the status quo that, if you like, keeps us coming up against this brick wall. But I think energy security is something that we can definitely do. You can't do it overnight, but ultimately, solar is one of the clear ways that we can basically grapple that energy security over the next number of years.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you very much for a very vivid presentation. My name is Vahid Fatuhi from the Middle East Solar Industry Association.
Thank you for your fuel.
The message here is that we could provide not just hydrocarbons, but perhaps other fuels as well. And the problems that we're facing in the Middle East is also similar, as we see today, the problem that the UK is facing, and it's related to continuity of policy. And I fully agree with you that the talks about changing policy from what has been the established view and framework for promoting utility-scale solar PV in the UK is very damning, not only for the UK, but for precedents it sets for other emerging markets, such as the Middle East. So my question to you is twofold. First of all, what do you think that the industry can do to make sure that the commitments that have been communicated remain in place in a sustained way? And secondly, perhaps more controversially, if you were to look ahead to next year, at the same event next year, what do you think are the probability that our efforts will be fruitful, and what are the chances that these tariffs will indeed be cut?
I think what we need to do is, and that was a sort of call to arms earlier, if you didn't notice. I think we have to push back. I think it's, you know, for the first time ever, we didn't as a company get involved in any of the other disputes with government. We didn't put our name down, we didn't basically go to court and all that, because fundamentally we thought we were on a sticky wicket, to be honest. We thought that 30p was, you know what, we've got 34 megawatts at 30p, literally. It is the best investment ever, but not for the government, just for us. And let's be absolutely clear, that was not sustainable. The difference here is that this doesn't make sense. It's cheaper. When compared to all other technologies, this is the one to back. And I'm sorry, therefore what I would say is that the way that we fight that is that we basically push back. From my perspective, and I talked to Electric very briefly earlier, and some other of the large companies, I think we've got to create a voice that says, guys, I'm sorry, but this is not good enough. We built our businesses on the back of the promises that you give, you as the UK government. In terms of your second point, which is what do I think is going to happen? Well, what I think is going to happen will depend on how well we do the first bit. And you know, if we are a load of disparate voices, reeds blowing in the wind, doing this, that, we're going to get done on to. And you're going to get whatever it is that the government has, depending on how strongly the UKIP televised debates are going. But from my perspective, I think we've got to disconnect those two things. I think we've got to show the UK government that we have a voice, illustrate to them and the Daily Mail, unfortunately, although that's quite a challenging thing, that we're actually all positive. What we're actually doing is correct. Because at the end of the day, what we've got on our side is right. We are definitely right to be doing this, and it is not right to be supporting other carbon-based technologies. We're killing the planet. And at the end of the day, even the Daily Mail reader eventually will get to that realization. But it's about us giving the ammunition to those individuals in a clear and concise way to make sure that we gather momentum. Thanks very much.